Hello, I'm Jill Schimmel, Senior Director of World Languages, and I want to welcome you to New York City Department of Education. I'm so thrilled to have you teaching world languages here in New York City. A little about me: I taught Japanese and ENL in middle schools. I'm proficient in Spanish, and I work in the Division of Multilingual Learners. I look forward to meeting you this year. This webinar is a chance for you to learn more about languages here in New York City, resources available for you, and instructional practices that will help your students achieve the New York State standards. I wanted to share this slide with the core beliefs, resources, and tools from New York City. I'm sure you've seen this slide a few times. And culturally responsive, sustaining education is important in all content areas, especially in our world language classes, where students have multiple identities and experiences. And the new Teacher Week planners created graphic organizers for you, since we value continued professional learning. So that's an opportunity for you. And then I created one specifically for you so we can keep in touch as you enter your world language classroom. In addition, the new teacher toolkit, which you've seen before, is available for you. So please continue to access everything on WeLearn for asynchronous learning. And so let's go to our session about world languages. I'm so glad you're here. And in this short webinar, we have just one objective. You probably know about the new standards, right? They were adopted in 2021, last year. And this session is to start building the knowledge of the instructional practices that you can use in your classroom to support your students in becoming our next leaders, our next ambassadors. They are our future. We'll discuss instructional practices that help our students communicate in multiple ways, in multiple contexts, and culturally appropriate. So standard 1, interpretive communication. Standard 2, interpersonal communication. Standard 3, presentational communication. And then we get to a deep view of culture, relating cultural practices and products to perspectives and cultural comparisons. Throughout this brief session, think about what these standards mean for us as teachers, and you'll see how the standards interconnect and overlap. The focus today is on what we as teachers do to bring the standards to life in our classrooms. So I've put together a document for you with the objective, the link to all the resources you need, and my contact information. So this document is linked in the video description too. And in a few slides, we'll get to a teacher tool that you'll need to make a copy of. So throughout this video, I'll ask you to pause the video to engage with the content and the ideas. So again, this tiny URL link has this one document for you, and it has highlighted for you the teacher tool that you'll need to make a copy of in a few slides. So this is not an info session on the standards, but I want to summarize the major shifts and help you understand what these standards mean for us as teachers. And again, you'll see how the standards interconnect and overlap. The focus today is about what we do as teachers to bring the standards to life in our classroom. And so the first shift that you know about is we're no longer Lotte, languages other than English, but we're world languages. And so with this change in policy and certification area, all of these things, please do guide your school to rename your courses and your departments and websites to remove references to Lotte. We are working to do so across the DOE, across all documents. We do have 5 standards, which we'll review in a minute. And we have some updated curricular topics under 4 overarching themes, which if you're familiar with the advanced placement course themes, those are there for you. Identity and social relationships, these are big buckets, and multiple topics are interconnected under these. So students spiral their learning about various aspects of contemporary life over their courses and their study of world languages. Number 4 is really exciting because we have benchmarked performance indicators. So target ranges for each checkpoint. So as you're planning for September, be sure to anchor your can-do statements in the targets for your course. If you're teaching middle school, you'd be aiming to have your students reach at least novice mid to novice high proficiency by the end of 8th grade. This graphic always also shows that with instruction starting in middle school, every student has a pathway to the New York State Seal of Biliteracy. And there's a link to learn more about that in your handout. And if you're high school, please do be in touch and we can get you started with a Seal of Biliteracy program for your students when they graduate. They can show proficiency in English and another language, and that looks great on resumes and college applications, and that will get them advanced coursework in college. So here are the 5 standards. It's 2 anchor standards, communication and cultures. That's similar to previous standards. And then we have 5 learning standards. Again, standards 1 through 3 center communication in multiple contexts for multiple purposes. And then standards 4 and 5 really give us a comprehensive look into culture, right? And the communities that speak the target language. All of these things promote college, career, and civics readiness, and really global readiness, right? We're in a global economy. Let's get our students ready for it. So let's talk more about the instructional practices, what you can do in your classroom to get students to achieve these standards. Let's look at a tool created for you, outlining the instructional practices you can use. So please do go to your note catcher, click on the yellow highlight, and you'll open up a copy of this document. This is make a copy for yourself, and this is a chance, we'll go through it section by section for you to reflect on the instructional practices you're planning for in September. I know that you haven't met your students yet, but so let's look at this teacher tool, at what it is, how it can be used, and why it's important. So, sorry, the slide. Look at your copy. What is it? It's a reflective teacher tool that outlines the instructional practices that you can use to help your students achieve the standards. And then in the tool, each practice includes resources to support you in classroom application. That's the big idea, right? What are the practices? And then how can I do it in my own classroom? Why was this created? Because educators do understand what the 5 standards are, but they requested examples of how they can make them alive in their own classrooms. A few instructional routines can make a huge impact in increasing your students' ownership and their proficiency journey. And how can you use this tool? Well, make a copy, and then you're going to engage and reflect on your own practice. So let's take some time now to look section by section. Again, you made your own copy. It outlines instructional practices and the resources. So we'll look at the foundational goal. What do you do to empower your students in your classroom? Then we'll think of practices for interpretive communication, interpersonal, presentational, and there aren't separate sections for standards 4 and 5 because you'll find that these standards can be met through the communicative modes. So foundational goals. We educators set the foundations for rigor and empowerment in our classes. So let's look at the foundational goal section. Consider how you are planning to greet your students next week. What's your opening unit? Which elements of these foundational practices will empower and engage students in your language classroom to keep them communicating, trying, and moving forward? Our language classroom should be nigiyaka. That's the Japanese word for buzzing with positive noise and energy. Students are trying, they're making mistakes. I'd like to think that the language classrooms are the most joyous and exciting classrooms in the school. And so consider what you notice in this foundational section and how these practices would help your students become communicators, not just conjugators. Pause this video and take a few minutes to self-assess on the 6 practices outlined in the foundational section. Great. Now, I want to zoom in and highlight 2 ways you can encourage students to take ownership of their proficiency journey. So I wanted to highlight instructional practice A, guiding learners to be language learners with a growth mindset. So take a minute to consider what this could mean for your students if you had this poster up in your classroom, how it would build a safe learning community, how you will inspire students to take ownership and push themselves forward to try in the language before they want to try an online translation tool, for example. This shows that you will assure them that you will do everything you can to help them understand and use the target language. That's outlined in practice B. Again, we won't go through each practice, but I want to zoom in on some practices. And this is practice C. Again, we want to know our students well and know what they are, where they are, what can they do, how can they communicate. Hopefully you've seen this graphic showing a student's path to proficiency. And as a note, I've layered on the seal of biliteracy, intermediate high, onto this graphic. So again, think about having this up in your classroom. What would it mean for students to think of where they are and where they're going? So this is an example from a teacher classroom, and they put this path to proficiency chart up, and students self-assessed where they are, and each color is a different class. So take a minute and think about, what do you see in this picture? Did you notice that within one class, there are very mixed levels? And we could even think about students in each of the modes. Are they novice high in speaking, but maybe just novice mid in interpretive reading, for example, right? So there are no student names. Students chose an image to self-assess, and then they'll move their image along this continuum throughout the year. And linked in Foundational Practice E, you'll see a copy of this digital proficiency portfolio. Teachers love this, students love this. It empowers students to consider what they can do and where they're going next. So we've talked about the foundational practices. So what's next to get the students communicative across the modes? I'd like to encourage you to engage with the other sections of this tool. Again, I know you haven't met your students yet, but as you get ready, think about how you will engage them with text and resources you chose for them. Which of the interpretive practices are you already familiar with, and which is a goal area for you? Take a minute to pause and go through goal area 1. Did you notice that there are a few more practices for interpretive communication? We often think of interpretive tasks as going first. After students engage with making meaning from a resource, they'll use that information in the interpretive, then interpersonal, then presentational modes. So let's zoom in on one very important practice, curating a rich set of authentic resources across the modes. These are texts and resources created by and for communities that speak the target language. Here's a sample set of resources from our Unit 1 on TeachHub, El Llanto de la Pachamama, which was released around Earth Day. And so you can see this is just some of the resources from this unit. There was an editorial article that students used for interpretive reading, looking at writer's perspective, then having pairs discussions. They thought about cultural comparisons, and then they did some presentational writing. They also engaged with a song from a Dominican governmental organization, and that gave them additional language, additional phrases, and more knowledge about the Pachamama celebrations. And they were able to compare to Earth Day through that authentic resource. And then that was paired with a video from the Argentinian government site, one of their many sites. And it gave them the opportunity to really look at the celebration, Dia de la Pachamama, and consider the community perspectives of those who celebrate this holiday. And it gave them the opportunity for cultural comparisons as well. So again, as you choose a rich set of authentic resources across genres, add some infographics, add an additional text, all of these things, maybe a poem, all of these things help students be successful and meet all standards in the unit. So if you want to learn more about authentic resources, linked in the instructional practices tool are 2 webinars for you. So now, after we highlighted one interpretive practice, let's look at the instructional practices for interpersonal communication. Which of these might you already be doing? Which interpersonal routines do you plan on introducing in September? Take a few minutes to reflect on goal area 2. So let's zoom in on one very important practice, providing a clear task for students during group work. Here's an example from week 3 of Unit 4, Agente de Cambio, also linked in your document. The interpersonal task was a jigsaw activity, with each group completing prompts and questions to the global goal they choose. So Unit 4 engages students in beginning to explore the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, 17 global goals to make the world a better place, right? And so each group was given a task, a very clear task. They had a section of sustainable development goals and they were to choose one. They had to come to an agreement to explore, discuss, and to share information with their peers. They did some independent reading before group discussion. In the process, they also had group roles. They also had available to them accountable talk stems. You could do a chat match, some way to keep the conversation going in the target language as you circulate to the other groups. And then the product, each group needed to complete a slide in the shared presentation. And so the screenshot on the right shows that one group, they outlined what was the sustainable development goal they chose. They had to discuss their individual notes and put the challenge addressed in their own words. And that's true negotiation of meaning. That is true interpersonal communication. And their discussion was grounded in the text and resources that we as the teachers provided for them. So that was an example of one interpersonal practice that you will want to use this year. And lastly, let's look at the presentational section, goal area 3. Take a few minutes and reflect on these practices. So for the presentational mode, it's an important practice to provide students with a short presentational task each day. Our lesson sequences on TeachHub model closing each day's lesson with an expresión task. Students have time and space to consolidate their thinking, to put it in writing or a short video, or even create an image to represent their learning. So in each of the TeachHub lessons, you'll see that there's always an expresión task. And students take time, even just a few minutes at the end of the period. Are they writing in a journal? Are they writing a text to self connection, a connection to previous day's learning? So again, a sample set of resources here. And you'll also see that at the end of this unit, students created a public service announcement that was outlined in the foundational section to have students working towards a summative task where they can take action. So here's an example from a student, Emma, and you can click on that. So again, we outlined and we highlighted a few instructional practices for each of the modes, and I hope that you'll find this tool very helpful for your purposes. I also wanted to share some advice from more veteran teachers I've worked with. We just had in-person learning a few weeks ago, and they shared this advice for you, the new teachers, as you start in your classrooms next week. Your students need you to be enthusiastic and calm before all else. So keep going. It's not a sprint, it's a long road. This is going to be an amazing year for you. I am here to support you, and you'll meet all of your goals in the future. Whatever you need, please do reach out. Don't be afraid and overwhelmed by the number of resources out there, and there are a lot. But think about what works for your classroom, what works for the curriculum you have, where might you want to amplify it, where can you add something additional for your heritage speakers in your class. That's a group of students, and there's an article linked in the note catcher. We really want to make sure every student moves on their path to proficiency. So find some great resources that you can use in multiple ways that can challenge all the students in your class. And find a small network of teachers and bounce ideas off them. I can help you connect with them, so please do reach out. So let's come back to our single objective for the session. Hopefully, you're more familiar with the instructional practices to bring the standards to life, so your students can engage across the 3 modes of communication: interpretively, interpersonally, and they can present information, express their preferences, as well as consider perspectives behind practices and products, and make cultural comparisons. Thank you for engaging in this webinar. I look forward to meeting you in the fall. So in your document number 2, please do click on the closing survey. It will take you to an Alchemar page, a survey, and you'll provide your information and we can keep in touch. I do look forward to meeting you in the fall. So please do let me know when works for you to meet as a group. And I wish you the very best. We're so happy to have you teaching here in New York City. And again, think about which practices you would like to improve and how I can help you. Reach out anytime. I'm Jay Schimmel at schools.nyc.gov. Welcome to the DOE.